NAACP meeting, they were having a town hall type thing, a candidate forum in Lake Elsinore at the community center there, or the cultural center. And I didn't know what to expect. This was probably 2012, I think it was during that period. And I walk in there, sit down and watch. I was doing a radio show, so I kind of was just taking notes to do this. And it was real interesting. It was like watching a Tea Party event. The issues that they talked about, the concerns they had, were what you would hear. The Constitution, illegal immigration. You would hear the same topics at a Tea Party and the same opinions. They had a couple of, remember there was that Hispanic or Latina Mexican lady running for, I think she was running for Congress or something. They had a few people there, Republican, and they also had Sheridan, who keeps running against Ken Calvert over and over again. He was there. He started spouting off Democratic talking points, and he got shredded. Okay, they didn't want to hear it. And so it's real interesting. So much, I think, of what happens is they have just want the rich to get rich and the poor to die in the streets and all this stuff. And then they kind of had this type of conversion done out there. But anyways, real quick on, just wanted to share that because it doesn't surprise me what I saw at the NAACP meeting. They would in no way call themselves Republican. But I found that their views and their opinions that they held were more Republican than they were Democrat. But they don't even know it. So they aren't being informed. So that goes on mind. The distortion of history, political narrative instead of facts. There's a small university
John,
in upstate New
you
York.
have to do the side a little bit. Either that or become transparent.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm trying to do the camera thing so too.
No, you're good right there.
Okay. Oh no. Okay. So.
No, we're good.
Yeah,
No.
you gotta move it. That's fine and move. Okay, that's fine. I gotta adjust it.
There you go.
And now it's to.
Now we can, or make it higher too for that one.
Yeah, expand it.
That's also on.
So.
That worked out.
Disappeared back out of my first shot. Okay.
Now you got to move the camera.
Yeah.
That'll work.
Doug, take the camera and turn it this slightly.
Slightly to the right or the left?
Back.
Left. Just rotate a little bit.
A little bit more.
You got it.
Right there.
Okay.
Good.
So how's this?
Good.
Okay. So in New York, there's a small university called Alfred University. It was established in 1836. And Alfred University is a very tranquil university set up in a rural setting. It only has 2,000 student bodies, even to this day, 2,000 students. So there hasn't been much controversy on campus. It avoided much of the turmoil that many campuses had, even leading up into the Civil War, over slavery and the states' rights issue and so forth. So there wasn't much. It wasn't a controversial school. I mean, it was it would be a classical liberal education, very peaceful, not a whole lot of controversy until the early 1990s. And what happened was this guy. They decided to put a statue of Alfred, King Alfred. Now, why did they do that? Because it's Alfred University. It's named after this guy. And it's in the town of Alfred, which is named after this guy. So it made perfectly good sense for them to name the school after him. But what ended up happening was the students all of a sudden started protesting, led by their professors, started protesting Alfred. And it was so bad that 53% of the students considered Alfred an inappropriate symbol. and they wanted him torn down. Now this is 1991.
And they knew who he was. They knew who
he was, and I'll be explaining on why they wanted him torn down. So who was Alfred? Well, King Alfred was known as the education king. Wessex during about the end of the 800s, and he was known as the education king because not only could he read and write, which was incredible for a monarch at that time. I mean, we think, oh, only the elites read and write. Most kings, most noblemen throughout Europe did not read and write. They were illiterate at this time. But he made sure that they had, all of his noblemen were able to read and write. He made that a requirement. Because every time before then, how all the other side did it was they would use scribes or monks to write down things, or they would use a messenger to relay instructions. So you can imagine how well that worked. I mean, most kings, if you can't read, who are the scribe to write whatever they want. And you sign it and put your seal on it, and who knows what you want. They granted himself some land or something. So Alfred wanted this done. He also made sure that there was schools in every town, so that anybody who wants to become literate, his town, the English language, the Anglo-Saxon language. Not only did he do that, he translated from Greek and Latin all the great works into the Anglo-Saxon language, and then had his monks and scribes copy that, so that in every church, in every village, there was a library, so that the common person can now go in and read these for themselves. Amazing for his time. He also, for the first time, had, in English history, had the law in writing. Before then, the law was pretty much whatever someone said. So if you were a commoner and a nobleman came up to you, and of course you couldn't read and write, said, you broke this law, you have to do this for me, you have to pay me, or I just don't like it, I want you dead, who was to protest? There was nothing that he could go to. Now, since he could read and write, he could say, here's the law, show me where I'm wrong. And this may start with the beginning of England becoming a nation of laws.
Along that line, one of his churches where Lazarus set up is still in existence today. The smallest cathedral in all of England, who still has their quote chain library. All the books were kept chained to the wall so that you can go out walking outside.
Yeah, so it's really, this isn't the 1800s, this is the 800s. Okay, so this is an amazing event. The English society at the time became one of the most, Wessex society became one of the most literate societies in the world. And he spent half of his budget, so a quarter of it went to education of his people, the other quarter went to hospitals and food pantries and stuff, making sure that the poorest person in the community had medical and food and shelter. This was an incredible. So what's upset with this guy? Why are they angry at him?
He's worried.
Okay. Now, one of the most important things too, if it wasn't for Alfred, there would not be any England. He was the first one to have this concept of uniting all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms into one. And he started the defeat of the Danish, of the Northmen. So if it wasn't for Alfred, and he's considered the father of England, if it wasn't for him, there would not be an England, there would be a Daneland. And we would probably be speaking Danish, a form of Danish, and the world would look a lot different than it does now. And I don't mean in a good way, probably a darker way. So what was their problem with him? Well, Voltaire first said that in the late 1700s, Voltaire wrote, I do not think there was that there ever was in the world a man more worthy of the God of prosperity than Alfred the Great. Voltaire, he is the greatest man in history. Now most people never hear of him. In fact, he is the only king in English history to have the great assigned to his name. So what was their problems? Well, his offense, according to Linda Mitchell, professor of medieval history at Alfred University. She should know better, right? Well, her at the time, in a New York Times article that covered this, she said that the problem with Alfred is he's a DWEM, a dead white European male.
Wow.
It would be foolish to choose a symbol so exclusive and effective in emphasizing the straight white male power structure of history. It does not matter what Alfred did. It is the class, the race that he belongs to. Now, I don't know what you call that, but to me, that is flat out bigotry.
Yep.
So how is it that how is it that in 1991, a professor of medieval history, something so horrendous? I mean, this is educational malpractice. I wish there was, you could sue these people for malpractice. This is what it is. Of London to get his doctorate degree in anthropology. And while he was at the University of London getting his degree in anthropology, history, I will study this history gaps. Well, he starts studying the history and looking, and he discovers something. He can't find evidence to support the history that he was taught at Oxford, which is pretty much the revisionist history that is taught in the Western world today. He then goes, and not only does he not find the history, anything that supports the history, everything he finds contradicts the history that he was taught at Oxford. And not only that, it supports the history of like Montesquieu and de Tocqueville and these old classic historians that he was told were discredited. But they were right. Because remember, anthropology, archaeology, what is that? That's the science side of history. Okay, they supply the physical evidence. So he's confused now, because he's a young man, right? And he's looking at these people who taught him at Oxford. Well, these are not dumb people. Obviously, if they got to Oxford, these are the highest of high. You know, this is the best university in the world. Everybody knows Oxford. They don't just pick people off the street to become professors there. So he's sitting there going, there must be something wrong. I must be doing something wrong. So he goes back to his, the headmaster at his prep school that he went to, who was himself an older man, but he was himself a respected historian. And he goes back to his headmaster and says, "Headmaster, I can't figure this out. All this history I was taught, none of it's matching. Where am I going wrong? What am I doing wrong? What am I missing?" So he goes, the headmaster takes it and says, "You know what, give me a couple weeks, I'll look at it and I'll let you know what you've done wrong." So a couple of weeks go by, and back at his house a few weeks later, Alan McFarlane receives his package with all of his stuff, and in it is a note that is back from his headmaster. And his headmaster says, in that note, it seems to me that something had gone awry between 1950 and 1970. It seems that in the 50s and 60s, the field of history has been captured by A, Marxists, and by B, by scholars who have so often ignored the conclusion of their own findings and forced them into a preconceived pattern. Alan McFarland has spent, since 1978, was his first book called The Origins of English Individualism. He has been fighting against this, and he just retired like 3 years ago from Cambridge as their head of their historical anthropology department. But he's been fighting against this ever. He's not the only one that caught it. Okay? David Landis, who was a professor of economic history at Harvard, wrote in his book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, the least one might expect of their historians is that they put their trust in hard data. Instead, their leap to judgment often beggars credulity. It is also wrong, and he goes on to say, and when some scholars refuse to adopt this new dispensation, they are dismissed as a dead horse that is not altogether willing to lie down.
Wow.
Now, I found something interesting about Professor Landis when he used the word dispensation. When you hear dispensation, what do you think of? What type of connotation does it have? Church, a religion.
Yeah.
So he's inferring that this is a religion. These people are religious. This is their religion. And to speak up against it makes you a heretic. Okay? No matter, even if you're right or wrong, you're a heretic. Okay? Dr. Danusha Gorska, professor of women's studies at William Patterson University, last year she was a leftist. She was born and she was into a communist household. She said she was as close as you can to becoming an atheist. She never considered herself a complete communist because she never gave up her Catholic religion. But she was all the way over there. And finally, over the years, she started questioning. And one thing she said in her article, she wrote the top 10 reasons I'm no longer a leftist, which was something that had come out once Obama was elected and leftism took off the mask. She didn't like what she saw. So she said when she was growing up, she said she was taught that the truth is that which serves the party, the Communist Party. That in fact was not even a venial sin. It was a way. One of those eggs was objective truth. Now, who is the one about? Anybody know who said if you want to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs?
Oh, Stalin, wasn't it?
Stalin. When he's talking about slaughtering people. In order to make a perfect society, sometimes you have to break a few eggs. Okay, and the truth in this case, it's ideas, it's truth, and we're seeing it on the campuses play out today. But more recently, and almost more frighteningly, how many of you recognize the name David Coleman? Okay, David Coleman was one of 5 of the architects of Common Core.
Oh, that's where we heard
Okay.
it.
He is now the head of the organization that creates the AP exams for our high schools and also the SAT exams. And he said, yeah.
He just did his SAT. History's no longer on it.
Well, that's probably a good thing, because if you read this quote, David Coleman said, history is not about facts, it is about narratives.
Oh.
So I want to kind of share with you one of the narratives that we often see today. And it's coincidence that this falls after Cinco de Mayo was not intended that way. But you all have seen this. The United States stole the Southwest from Mexico.
No, we paid for it.
This is something that is taught over and over, right?
Yeah.
Where is it taught?
High school.
High school, college, elementary school.
Right
where do you
here in
want it?
America?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Most kids don't know, you think this is 100% true. Most Americans now think this is 100% true.
Most Latinos do. When I was at a Trump rally, they would say that.
Yes. They would say that 57% in a 2014 poll in Mexico, 57% of Mexicans believe this. Not only that, there was a New York Times editorial that came out a few weeks ago from a historian, a Mexican historian, a historian in Mexico, one of the top historians in Mexico.
Okay.
The New York Times saying that Trump's wall and immigration policy is illegal because this land was originally from Mexico, and we stole it from them.
Okay.
Okay. But one thing that they forgot to tell you, and this is the land here, but one of the things that they forgot to tell you is they forgot to mention the Constitution of 1824. Okay, Mexico got their independence in 1821. They tried monarchy and that failed. And the south side of Mexico seceded and formed the Central American Republic, which eventually became the states of Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua and Costa Rica. So those are the nations that became out of that. So they seceded, but they ended up forming this constitution, which was ratified by all the states. Now, in Mexico, a federal republic. It established 19 states, 5 territories, and 1 federal district, which was Mexico City. So 19 states, remember that, 19 states. It was a weak federal central government.
Starting to sound a little familiar, isn't it?
Yes, it's actually kind of between, it would be, I would place it, reading it, if you read the document, go online, read it in English, they have, it's kind of halfway in between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. It's in between. And the states were autonomous and sovereign states. The federal government, just like our Constitution, was pretty much supposed to be just external. And it was supposed to deal only through struggles or any problems between the states, any conflicts between the states. Other than that, the states had their own senates and everything, and they did their own laws and stuff like that, as long as it was within the Constitution. What happened was, in 1835, we had this guy come to become president of Mexico. His name is Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Now,
Remember the Alamo?
remember the Alamo? Well, that's a humble beginning there. So he is known as Napoleon of the rest. He was an authoritarian. He was despotic, and he was called Caudillo Supremo. He was El Jefe. He was the strongman. In your, you know, what you think of the Latin American dictator strongman, that was him. Now, to be fair to Santa Anna, Mexico, in that period of about 10 years, had 40 presidents. Each president lasted about 7.8 months. The government was just completely dysfunctional. Okay, so he came and he decided he was going to solve this once and for all. So he introduced what was called Los Siete Leyes in 1836, the 7 laws. Now, what the 7 laws did was completely constitution. He did not have a constitutional convention. He did not get together the states to talk about it, or representatives. He just said, no, it's all gone. I'm done with it. This is not working. I'm the one who says what's going to happen. He took it away. It centralized all power in Mexico City. Okay? And it established, of course, a dictatorship with, guess what? Him as dictator. And it completely eliminated the states. Okay? The states were now departments of the federal government. Okay? There's no such thing as a state in Mexico. So can you imagine 10 years after the U.S. Constitution was ratified and everybody adopted it, some guy becomes president and says, that's it, we're done with this. I'm the boss now, and this is how it's going to be. What do you think would happen here?
Revolution.
Revolution. Well, same thing there. There was rebellion. And the biggest, the most famous that everyone wants to talk about is Los Tejanos. The Texans rebelled against this. Now, notice something about this artwork. This is a book about the revolution, about the rise of Texas. Look at that. This is the flag they fought under, 1824. Okay, here it is here. Now, they want us to believe this is some sort of coincidence, I guess. Constitution of 1824, the flag. I'm sure there's nothing there. There's nothing to see there. That's just, they just put that there. There's nothing to do. But they were fighting for the states' rights under the 1824 Constitution that Texas and these other Mexican states ratified. They did not see Santa Anna having any authority over this. But they weren't the only ones. Okay, this here in 1837, these are all the areas that rebelled. Out of how many states were there?
19.
11 rebelled against the federal government. And some of them, not just Texas, which is here, some of them even formed a republic. There was the Republic of the Rio Grande. These states got together and formed their own republic. And over here in California, in the Southwest, these were territories. Okay? There was hardly anybody living there. In this part, where they say, oh, this is all Mexico, no. You had a settlement in Santa Fe, you had a settlement in Los Angeles, and settlements, that's all they were. They weren't even towns. And a mission in San Jose. That was the extent of Mexican control in this part. Now, what is interesting, though, is the story of this one. The 5 southern states formed in 1840, they finally broke off and formed the Republic of the Yucatan under the 1824 using a similar constitution. Now, what is interesting here, the Rio Grande was ruthlessly put down by Santana on his way to Texas. 250 days it lasted, and they were just completely decimated. He was a complete dictator, and it wasn't nice. He wasn't going in there being a nice guy. Okay, but this one here, it lasted until almost 10 years, from 1840 to 1849. And what is interesting about this one is this is the flag of Mexico back then. Very much the flag of today, right? Not much different. Well, here's the flag of the Republic of Yucatan. Kind of looks a little bit familiar to me. I mean, it has green and the red and white, just like the Mexican flag. But 5 stars, 5 states, a star for each state, I don't know. That just seems kind of, I think I've seen that somewhere before.
Can I ask, what does the green stand for?
Usually, I'm not sure in Mexico, but usually it has to do with Catholicism. Green is the color of Catholicism. It represents
The Catholic Church.
Catholic Church, because it was a Catholic republic.
Okay.
So it did, all their constitutions they did have an official state church,
That's right.
and that was Catholic.
Italy is red, white, and green.
Right. Yeah, so there's Catholic and
Questions at the end.
it's all, the flag's always fighting each other. Anyway, but here you look at the stars and stripes, and this looks familiar,
Yeah.
right? Well, they actually tried during those years to become a state of the United States. Now, this is interesting. What's the thing here? They say Texas rebelled, as the myth, the narrative goes, because all these white Anglos came in and persuaded the Texans to rebel. They took over. Okay? Well, there was no, way down here, there was no white Anglos immigrating down into the Yucatan. And they came very close in becoming a state of the United States.
Could you imagine?
Except for one thing. In the 1840s, what was the biggest internal conflict going on in the United States at the time? Slavery. They had in their constitution no slavery was allowed in the Republic of Yucatan.
But since they were south of the Missouri line of compromise.
The southern states shut it down. They said no, we aren't going to. Sorry, I mean Texas, yes, because Texas allowed slavery.
The Missouri Compromise of 1832 was a requirement that everything south of that line was supposed to come in as slave
Right,
states.
and
If
they wouldn't.
it wouldn't.
But it came close. That was the only thing that prevented it from becoming. So
Interesting.
this whole argument that this was Mexican land and that it was a conquest of imperialism or manifest destiny and stuff is not true. What is interesting up here is that, like I said, well, let's go to the next one. The variation of that is stolen birthright. that we had stolen the land from Mexican people living here. Well, if we go back to this map, and again, stolen birthright, this is a map used in schools, by the way. I got offline, this is used in schools. Okay, stolen birthright, territory seized from Mexico as spoils of war. So, what they show here, like I said, there was only three little settlements outside of Texas that were quote unquote Mexican. The rest of the land was uninhabitable, or it was Native Americans living there who had no more love to the Mexican government as they did to the American government. Now that's one of the other myths they try to portray, that this was that somehow all the people of color were united at that time. No, they were killing each other too. So what they ended up doing is trying to say that not only did we take the land, but we booted out the Mexicans living there and took their land from them. Well, let's look at that. First of all, there was only 3 Mexican settlements, and I use the term loosely, Mexican, because of the second thing. There was no such thing as Mexicans at that time. These people were Tejanos of Hispanic descent. These people were Californianos or Californos, depending on what you want to use. They had no idea of what a Mexican was. Because think about our country. It wasn't until after the Civil War that this concept of an American identity came about. You were your state. You were Virginian. You were Georgian. You were Texan. You were New Yorker. You were Ohioan.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
you were not an American.
Right.
Of the that there was people identified themselves as Mexican did not happen until the Mexican Revolution of 1910, 1917. And then that started to coalesce. They said, okay, we got to unify the country. We can't have all these states. So they started a program, an education program, to develop this Mexican identity. And the main thing is this. Nobody left conquered territory. There was no refugees leaving Texas or this part of the country. Okay, think about this. After the American Revolution, 60,000 left the new United States. Most went to Newfoundland. A few went down into the Caribbean colonies. 5,000 packed up everything they had, went all the way back across the Atlantic, back to England. You had no mass exodus out of Texas once the Anglos took over. Why? Because they had it better in Texas than they had it in Mexico. These aren't dumb people. They knew where it was. I mean, think about it. In 10 years, Mexico went from having 40 presidents, each one lasting 3/4 of a year, to having this dictator come to power, stripping all their rights away. So you are a Tejano. Do I stay connected to Mexico? Or, gee, there's this country over here governed by laws, and they seem to have an established government. The leaders don't take over. They don't have coups. They don't, who do I want to belong to? Well, to them it was obvious. They wanted to belong with these people, not these people. So the whole thing is, which I go to next, is it was a liberation. These people were being attacked by a despotic, tyrannical, authoritarian regime that stripped their states away of all its rights. And they turned to the one country to act together and said, protect us. We want freedom. We don't want to be controlled by a dictator. We don't want to be controlled by some petty tyrant. We want a rule of law. And they asked the United States to come and help them, just like the Yucatan did. They wanted to get out of Mexico. Why does this history matter? We had this raging debate on legal immigration. Now, you start with the Constitution of 1824 and how that impacted the revolution in Texas, go ahead and tell me about it. Tell me what Santa Anna did, the Siete Leyes. Tell me about it. I want to hear you tell me why that matters. You shut these people up fast. Of course, they're going to, well, you don't shut them up, they're just going to resort to name calling very fast.
Oh, yeah.
They're gonna scream at you.
They just walk away. I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
It ain't real.
Yeah, but see, this is why we have to be educated. Because this is some of the stuff that you guys are hearing for the first time. And some of the history that I dug down deep, I'm discovering for the first time, like the Yucatan and its flag and its fight to try to become a state. Okay, they tried for years. It wasn't like they just came one time, hey, can we be a state? I mean, they were talking to, I think it was the Polk presidency at the time, but I can't remember who is Secretary of State, Benjamin, not Harris, maybe, I can't remember. But anyway, they were talking to him. I mean, it got into the Senate. I mean, they had full hearings on this. And it came very close. So this was a big deal. So why does history matter? Well, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, when I want to understand what is happening today, I try to decide what will happen tomorrow. I look back. A page of history is worth a volume of logic. If we understand history, then we don't fall for the little tricks that they pull. Okay? Thomas Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be both ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Okay, where do you think we are now? Okay. And Robert Heinlein said, a generation which ignores history has no past and no future. Okay, Robert Heinlein's a scientist. He's not a politician, he's a science fiction writer.
I quote him every once in a while.
Yeah. So, this is why they want to destroy history. They want to distort history. Again, this part of the Mexican Revolution, or the Mexican American that led up to the Mexican-American War, Texas, us annexing, I'd say liberating southwest of the United States, or the northern part of Mexico, okay, is something that they don't want to talk about. Like that 1824, just don't look south. Don't look after what's going down south of the border. All we want to do is know what's going on north of the border. See what the evil Anglos are doing. And because we don't know it, we're losing the argument. This is why I write my books. Because kids, like their age, they aren't getting us in school. So who does it fall on? It falls on us. And we have to know, we have to become the teacher. And to become a teacher, you have to know the topic. Because you just can't get away with saying nonsense like they do. So, my big thing to take away, and this is my personal little motto, history should always influence politics. Politics must never, ever influence history.
Amen.
People tell me, oh, well, you write the history you write because you're a conservative. I say, no, I'm a conservative because of the history I write. It tells me these values are what work, and if you want to, I'll share it with you, but they don't want to be shared. So we need to start doing this, and again, it's just kind of ironic that, or coincidence that Cinco de Mayo yesterday, and the Battle of Puebla and stuff, and now
Don't worry, Cinco de Mayo is all about beer, selling more beer, seriously.
I have no problem with selling beer, or buying it, but
Drinking.
yeah, drinking, that's the best part. So, but
That guy's a
actually my
big
logo
problem.
here. So you know, but we have to do this because they aren't being educated, and when you don't, again, the story of Mexico and the conquest that they use of northern Mexico by the racist imperialistic gringos is you fall for that if you don't know the truth. And that's why history is so important, and we got to realize it's being grossly distorted. I think calling it distorted is a nice way to put it. Nice way. So,
You know, I'm really impressed with your presentation as Doug did before. I will only criticize in one category. The war by which they claim we stole their land from them. The Americans, the closest battle we fought in the Mexican-American War, we were only outnumbered 5-1.
right.
And we fought more than one battle, we were out 20 to 1.
Right.
At the time that war occurred, Mexico was the 5th largest military force in the world, and I forget where we were. We were down in the 30s. We were
Yeah,
way
we were
above.
still a third world country.
Or Argentina.
We were the third world country.
At that time, Chile had a bigger navy than the United States.
Wow.
And that's another fact of history.
So what beat
they're
Mexico?
ignoring.
American ingenuity,
Right.
specifically the American system of interchangeable parts for our firearms. That was one of the largest factors.
But yeah, and again, but we also did, Mexico's army was largely a peasant army, a forced conscription. And like they already said, you know, free men always fight better than slaves do. So.
That's true.
Yeah, and I'm very impressed, Mr. Hancock. I think you should contact Ines D'Souza. He should make another movie and use some of your information. Because when I saw Hillary's America, you know, and I saw Obama's America, the first one, you know, I was enlightened about so many things about our past
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
From Andrew Jackson's, you know, how we kicked the Native Americans off their land and sold their land, made money, and of course he had many slaves. But I think, you know, that you're educating the Latinos that are so many that are here in California about true history. I think they would be
Right.
flabbergasted. They need more information out there. Like
Yeah, I
true
mean,
movie.
there's a joke in Spanish, and they put it in English. It says that, you know, there's a lady comes up, a young girl comes up to, a young lady comes to visit her in LA. She's deep down in Mexico, and they're driving around, you know, the sights. Her cousins are taking her to Disneyland, LA, seeing all this stuff. And one of her cousins says, yeah, you know, this used to belong to Mexico until the Anglos took it all away. And she looks around and she says, yeah, they took the best part too. But that's the concept. These people don't understand that this will be just as bad as Mexico, that their parents fled. You know, if it wasn't for, they wouldn't be fleeing, they'd be fleeing from here. If it wasn't for this being part of the United States and the Anglo-Saxon system of government. In my book, and when I go out and speak on that, unfortunately, Mexico inherited the Spanish Roman-style rule of government from Spain. And I said, if you want to see where the Roman rule of law and the Roman system of government meets, which is a top-down authoritarian system, and the Anglo-Saxon system meet, just go, you know, a few miles south of here. If you stand on the Mexican border, look south, all those inherited a Roman form of government. You turn north, Canada, United States, inherited the Anglo-Saxon system of government. That's what makes the difference.
That university in the beginning, I'm sorry, what was that?
Alfred.
Alfred.
Alfred's
I don't
great.
understand the logic behind that professor. So they named the university after this guy Alfred.
Back in
And
1836.
the town was also,
Alfred.
but they
New
couldn't
York.
have a statue commemorating the
1990.
town and the university, which was named after this person. The logic is this.
Because he's a dead white European male.
That's left progressive.
Now, just real quick too, that lady, Linda, I don't know why I'm on her name. The professor I quoted, who was a professor of medieval studies, you'll be glad to know she's no longer a professor at teaching medieval history at Alfred U. She's a professor teaching gender studies at the University of Missouri. You know where they had all that protests and stuff? That's where she teaches now.
Gender studies.
Now she's the one that's have a separate transgender. But you know what's happening? You see what's happening now in bathrooms now more and more? They're just saying it's. They don't have, they're getting rid of men's and women's in a lot of places.
Cliff, yeah, we're recording this, so if you,
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry.
So anyways, and that's it. If there's
We
any
can
other
edit.
questions or suggestions,
Wow.
raise your hand.
I
Otherwise,
will say this,
I have one behind.
I have a quick question. After the Mexican-American War, the United States purchased.
Yes, that's the other thing too,
And
right?
do you remember what the dollar amount was?
10 million.
10 million, okay,
was it 10 million? I thought it was a little bit more than that.
I looked it up, 10 million.
okay.
What I was gonna say is, last time I saw you give this presentation, you've added to it since, and I
I
like what
changed
you've added.
the center topic to make it, because I was debunking colonialism before.
Sort,
And so,
is this going in a book or a pamphlet or a?
yes, I'm trying to figure out which way to do it. This, I think, I was talking about doing topical books. I think maybe do something like the 10 Myths, or do something, a book on this one. I think this one can have its own little, like 100-page book on this, and then I would include, I could go deeper. I mean, this is a long time, Doug's giving me a long time to speak. Most of the time when I speak, I get 20, 30 minutes. So I gotta pick and choose what I can hit.
Because, to me, my opinion, their story is predicated on the major power, beat up a third world. And in reality, it was very much the reverse.
Right.
But for our ingenuity.
Well, what were the two biggest empires of the 20th century? What were the biggest empires of the 20th century?
And that the English and
No.
the US?
Well, the first part, but they kind of fit in.
Was it Argentina?
No.
The US and Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union and China.
Oh, China.
Ah.
Because most of China is made up of conquered land.
That's true.
It is not, they aren't all Chinese. So we think of them, but you know what? They get a pass. And when I talk about,
There's other good communists we hear.
and as I talked about in my other presentation on colonialism that I didn't do here, is that the reason there's people starving in Africa is because they were sold by American liberals and raised socialism.
Rhodesia.
Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, yeah. And that, and my thing, look up Botswana. Botswana kept the English system. In 1966, they became independent. They kept the English system completely. They went from the lowest per household, not per capita. It's not just one where they took the total and divided up among people, because that doesn't show distribution. Of the average income per capita was the lowest in sub-Saharan Africa in 1966 when they gained independence. Today, and for the last, since the 90s, it's been second only to South Africa.
Which kept it also.
Which also kept
Kept
it. Yeah.
They never had any coups, no assassinations, thing, and someone else was elected. No civil war.
It shows that it's what you think, not what color your skin is.
Right, exactly. It's all culture. Which is something, again, this is another distortion of history I could go into, is how we're blending culture and race into one. Are completely different. And a good example, I grew up, my friend Brad across the street, both his dad was a second generation Japanese, his mom was from Japan. So physically, race-wise, he was 100% Japanese. But you dropped and he would be just as lost as you or I. Culturally, he would not be able to do it because he was an American culturally. He was not Japanese.
Makes sense.
So we have to separate that, and now though, if you say something that is against someone's culture, now you're attacking the race. That's completely nonsense. But that's just another way to shut you up. Race and culture are not the same thing. Race is nature, culture is nurture. Race is what you're born with, you can't help that. But culture is what you learn. And it's what you continue to learn. Okay, because this, my friend Daniel Hannon said this perfectly. He said there's a reason why the Bahamas is not Haiti. And Haiti is not the Bahamas. Black slaves, same thing, same history. What was the difference? One inherited the English system, one inherited the French system.
I said on the radio program today, race means nothing, it's all about the political system.
Right. Chinese, you have two types of Chinese. You have the Chinese on the mainland, and you have the Chinese in Hong Kong. What's the difference between them?
Taiwan.
And Taiwan, what's the difference between them? Nothing. Racially, there's no difference. They're Chinese. Culturally, there's a huge difference. But again, you don't just like the flag. Don't look at that. You're not supposed to look at that stuff because it'll disprove almost everything that people believe, that a large percentage of people, too many people, believe in today. Was there a hand up back there? Or is there? Okay. So anyways, is there any more questions? I think I took up enough of everybody's time, but if there's more questions, I'll answer them.
I did notice a few people snuck in while